You're tuned in to More Living with Jim Brogan, broadcast live from the Brogan Financial Studios at News Talk 98.7, where old-fashioned values, expert knowledge, and genuine understanding come together to give you the retirement straight talk you deserve. Jim's a former National Advisor of the Year recipient and a financial educator, and he's here today to talk about how you can live out the best years of your life. Jim and the Brogan Financial team have been helping retirees and pre-retirees across the Southeast for over 20 years in their pursuit of financial independence. You can reach them during the week at 865-862-6800. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn, because More Living with Jim Brogan starts now.
Happy Saturday, East Tennessee, and welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI, and Knoxville has just seen such tremendous growth. Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs has been the face of the county for the past 7 years. And there's been growth in population, there's been high business growth over the past decade. Now, certainly with growth come challenges. Today we're going to talk about some of the successes, some of the great things moving forward, and some of the challenges that he's seen over the past year. Mayor Jacobs, welcome back to More Living. It's great to have you back on.
Hey, Jim, thanks for having me. I always enjoy coming on with you.
Thank you so much. Well, here we are. Another year's passed. You're in year 7 of your mayoral career. Are there things you wish you could have done in the 2 terms that you now feel like I want to get this done in the next 18 months?
Well, a lot of what I had set out to accomplish, I've been able to do. Some of the things are just, not raising taxes. So some of the things that I haven't done, which I'm happy about. Obviously with COVID, I wish that had never happened, because that really impaired anyone's ability to move forward, to progress with things, especially on the economic front. But overall, the county, I think, is in a really good place. Tennessee's in a really good place. Oftentimes I think we gauge things by a fantasy utopia instead of reality of what we really live in. So I try to gauge it, by that. Obviously, there's things that we'd all love to do, but they're not going to be possible. So the old saying of, playing with the cards that you're dealt, I think that we have done a pretty good job of that.
Well, so you mentioned the economic growth. Our economy has really been resilient during times of uncertainty. Do you think we'll continue to see the growth in job security that we have during other volatile times, as people are starting to get a little bit concerned that with tariffs we might see a little bit of slowdown, maybe go into recession? Do you think Knoxville will continue to be resilient?
I think we will, compared to the rest of the country. Obviously we're talking about comparisons. So can I say, oh gosh, everything's going to continue as it has? I don't know. Our policies across the state of Tennessee really help us economically. We're one of the lowest tax states in the country. We have a pretty much common sense regulatory environment instead of some of the things that we see other places. So I think that we'll be okay. Obviously all of us want, again, we want perfection. We're not going to have that. But I'll tell you a story, Jim. I was actually up in Missouri this week. Missouri is trying to eliminate their state income tax. So some folks invited me to come up and talk with some of their members of their legislature and the governor. And as I was speaking with Governor Kehoe, who's a really good guy, he said that when he would he said that when he goes to recruit businesses, because Missouri has an income tax, he's already at a massive deficit behind the states that don't have income tax. So it's true. These things do make a difference, and we often overlook that. We take for granted in the state of Tennessee having no income tax. But it is really important, and to your question, it helps us be resilient when other states and other localities can't be because of the way that their tax structure is especially set up.
Yeah, I think that's a great word. We're very fortunate. Of course, that's one of the reasons we're attracting people from all over the country. How are we equipped to continue to grow with all the people that are moving into East Tennessee? And what are the challenges that puts on our infrastructure?
Sure. And I think one thing we have to remember is why people are moving, and it's because we are an attractive area to live. Other places are not so attractive, and it's almost one of those things. Again, when we compare ourselves, some other places cause us issues because they have basically mismanaged things so badly that people can't wait to get out, and then they come to Tennessee, which is great because they're productive people, hopefully bringing businesses with them and entrepreneurial spirit and all those sort of things. But obviously that does put some challenges on things like infrastructure. So that's where our Advanced Knox initiative comes in, is really making better use of the infrastructure that we currently have. For years, we've seen sprawl, say, out in the Hardin Valley area, and that was a result of our policies. And we don't want to see that happen in other areas of the county, because not only is it not good for quality of life, it's also very bad fiscally. When we have to build just tons of new roads and just all this new infrastructure, that's really, really expensive. And obviously that increases the ongoing costs for just maintenance. So what we're trying to do is kind of funnel and direct the growth into areas that we can accommodate it, along the arteries and the 4-lane highways, as opposed to the country back roads and all those sort of things. We still have another step to go with that. We still have a unified development ordinance. Why the UDO is important is because currently our development ordinances are kind of haphazard and ad hoc, and we would like to put all those together so that would streamline the process and hopefully help drive down the cost of housing from a regulatory standpoint, what government does to make housing more important. But there's no doubt there are some challenges going forward. But I always remind people, other places have problems. We have challenges. And I would much rather have our challenges than I would have their problems.
Yeah, that's a great word. You mentioned Advanced Knox. Quite a bit of money and resources and time have been spent on that plan. You recently sent a letter to the Knox County Commission urging them to follow that plan when it comes to zoning. Why do you think they've been dragging their feet on the implementation of Advanced Knox?
It's just getting used to something new, and getting used to a new way of doing things. I don't think that it was deliberate. I think that's just kind of the way that things have been done. And you're used to doing it one way according to this, and we really need to do it according to the new plan. If we don't, that opens us up for legal liability, as well as our Unified Development Ordinance wouldn't work then. Because, we can say all day long, this is what we want to see in this area, but if developers aren't allowed to do that in that area, there's no point in having it and, going through another process and spending a lot more money. So I don't think it's anything deliberate that Commission did. It was just, kind of falling back on what they'd been used to doing.
So we got a little bit of prodding going on, hopefully.
What's that?
In other words, you're trying to prod them along a little bit, get them kind of adopted to the new plan.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. And our commission's good, especially when you compare it to others around the state and country. We have some very thoughtful folks. So just a reminder, guys, this is the way that we all said we're going to go. Now we need to start going that way.
Absolutely. Let's talk about housing. In February of 2025, home prices were up 13% compared to last year. We are still experiencing an affordable housing shortage. So what do you think? And we all see all the multifamily being built in the area. What are some solutions to affordable housing in the area?
Well, first of all, I don't really like to call it affordable housing because that has some very negative connotations, and that's no longer true. We're not talking about Section 8 tenement housing. We're just talking about housing that people can afford. And what's happened is housing prices across the country, but especially in East Tennessee, have outpaced wages. So you literally have to be almost upper middle class to afford a home in Knox County. It's gotten that expensive. I guess it was last year, for the first time ever, we exceeded the country's average of median average home price. Our rents are also high for the same reason. So much of it is supply and demand. And again, we have people coming in. We have folks that are retired, and I'm getting that age. Nothing gets retired, folks. But they live in a more expensive area. They live in a high tax jurisdiction, so they sell their home there. They get a lot of money for their home there. they can come here and get the same home for half as much, so they're not afraid to bid it up a little bit. And that's one of the issues that we've seen. But overall, a lot of it has just been, it's just supply and demand. There's a lag, too, and you know this. I mean, this will carry on even after new units come on as the market adjusts. But ultimately, it is all about supply and demand and figuring out how, as a government, again, one of the things that we can do or shouldn't be doing that hurts home prices is zoning, which doesn't make any sense, and overregulation. So we're trying to address those things through advanced Knox, through the Unified Development Ordinance, and other things. And at the same time, we want to ensure that we keep our character especially in our rural areas, and advanced Knox is designed to do that as well. So it's one of those things where this is probably going to continue for a little while just because there's always lags in the market. But hopefully what we're doing does have an impact going forward. I wish I had a crystal ball. I'm sure you do too when it comes to investment advice, so you can say, man, if we just do this, this is going to happen. It doesn't work that way. So all we can do is just common sense reforms.
Absolutely. It's tough for young people because, getting out of college, my daughter, she's about to turn 25, about to get married. She and her fiance are going to be moving back to the area. The idea of home ownership for a young couple in their 20s, it's getting to be more and more of a challenge, especially in Knoxville.
It sure is, and that concerns me with our economic viability moving forward. Again, nothing against older folks. I'm an older folk myself, right?
I am too.
But we're seeing our population is aging now, and I think it's kind of a double whammy. We have people moving in that are older to take advantage of a great place to live, a great quality of life, and a much more advantageous tax environment. But they have more money, and obviously as they spend that money, especially on housing, you're going to see the price of that go up. Meanwhile, what's happening is the younger people who are not established, who don't have those kind of resources, in some cases they're getting bid out, outbid of the market. They just can't afford it. So it's a real issue, not only for all the other things we talk about, but as we look at our economic viability long term, we want to keep the young people too, because they're the ones that are going to build businesses. They're the ones that are going to have long-term employment. They're the ones that bring the economic vibrancy. And if we fail to capture that, long-term we'll be in some trouble.
Yeah, I think that's a great word. We're visiting with Mayor Glenn Jacobs. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things happening in Washington, in the White House, things like DOGE, things like the tariff plan. How might that affect us here in East Tennessee? So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm Jim Brogan, and we're visiting with Mayor Glenn Jacobs. It's been almost 7 years now that he's been in office, so he's seen it's been interesting the last 7 years. We've been through a global pandemic, but Knoxville continues to thrive and grow. There before the break, Mayor Jacobs, I did mention Washington, D.C. and President Trump. How might what's going on in Washington, do you think, affect our area here?
Well, obviously, there will be an impact all across the country, and it might be different in different areas. We talk a lot about the tariffs because that's kind of the flavor of the day, but I think there's actually a much bigger underlying issue, and that's the fact that in America, we should have a free market, free enterprise system. And that is the greatest wealth creation system the world has ever seen. We worry so much about the communist Chinese, or we worry so much about competing with the communist Chinese. They should be worried about competing with us. And the reason that that's kind of flipped is because of overtaxation, overregulation, government spending. So those things, tariffs or not, those things have to be addressed. And if we are to roll those back, I mean, we would just, our economy would explode. I'll give you an example, actually two examples. We are in the bottom third of developed nations when it comes to the time that it takes for a nuclear power plant to come online. That's vitally important here in East Tennessee because we should be leading the world in nuclear power. And the governor's made a big push, and everybody's making this push. But so long as the permitting and regulation takes that much time to get through, it's just not going to happen. I mean, it's just not viable. Here's another example. You know, we all know that microchips and semiconductors, they've moved off seas. Why did that happen? Well, because it for a while it was taking 10 years for a permitting process for a new microchip plant. Now, thanks to Bill Hagerty, one of our great senators from Tennessee, it's just common sense reform. Instead of having sequential permitting where you have to get this permit first before this permit, and now they can do parallel permitting where you just get them all at the same time, got it down by 80%, which will make us much more competitive. So obviously, you know, I'm not a fan of tariffs. They raise prices, and unfortunately, in some cases, the government picks winners and losers. But I think the bigger issue is our economic foundation. But yeah, obviously that will, when businesses here see their raw goods go up in price, that will have an impact, all those sort of things, as well as, there is a lot of cost-cutting measures coming out of Washington. I applaud that because it just needs to happen, but it will have a local impact here, there's no doubt.
Yeah, on the tariffs, it's interesting because when that came out, the Tariff Proclamation Day, I think that was April the 2nd, I was talking the following week here on this station that I don't think anybody expected that in 90 days the tariffs would look like what they were announced on Wednesday, April 2nd. And then I'll also say that 60 days, 90 days from now, when we look at what's going on with China, I don't think many people believe, do we really believe the tariffs in 90 days with China will be where they are today?
Right.
There's just, things are just a little bit different in terms of how our current president handles all those things.
Right.
But one of the things I've talked about, Mayor Jacobs, is coming into this, the U.S., our economy was in a better spot to be able to handle some stress than most other countries, and especially compared to China. So do you have any comments on that in terms of the leverage that Trump is trying to use here? Because in the long run, I'm not a fan of tariffs either, but can you just comment on that?
No, I agree with you. He uses them as a negotiating and a leveraging tool, which is completely different. I'm talking about the economic impact of tariffs. He looks at almost with diplomacy, and ultimately what I would like to see, and I assume you'd agree with this, is lower tariffs or no tariffs around the world, and to allow the American companies to actually compete, because if we're allowed to compete, no one's going to beat us. I'm not talking about NAFTA, which is like 1,700 pages of regulations and quotas and all these different things. I just mean, look, you drop your tariffs, we drop ours, we can trade with minimal government interference. If that happens, America could thrive as never before. But I absolutely agree with you. Trump, he's a little different. And in this case, I don't think he looks at the economics so much as he looks at the art of making the deal.
Yeah, I think that drives him too. Now, you mentioned government efficiency and cost cutting, and of course, DOGE has been upending federal agencies. A new report Tuesday by the job listing website Indeed shows the number of workers looking for new jobs has spiked. Have the DOGE cuts or the DOGE job cuts and layoffs affected workers in Knoxville?
I would say marginally. Some federal workers will probably see their jobs go away. But we also have to understand something, that government is not a make-work program. And too often we hear, government created all these jobs. No, what they did is they took money out of the private sector to create jobs sometimes which frankly just aren't productive. And that's job is really reflects productivity. And in some cases, they actually become worse. They become bureaucrats who stand in the way of productivity. So there's two sides to this. Is yes, you take money out of this, but you allow the private sector to keep more of their money where the productive work happens. Obviously, it does have impacts on people, negative impacts, and we need to understand that, and not be like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever, and these people are losing their jobs. At the same time, the overall outcome should be positive because it should result in less waste and more productivity on the private sector side.
I think that's a good word because private industry is so much more efficient. I mean, we have things in our government, in our Internal Revenue Code, for example, that kind of acknowledges private charities are going to be more effective with the money than government social programs. And so they give an incentive to give charitably to serve people at a local level and all over the country. So private industry, I think that's a great word, but at the same point, we don't want to be callous to the people being laid off.
No,
I think
exactly
that's a great
not.
word.
Yeah, and
let's talk about.
Too, Jim,
Go ahead.
But we have to also understand there's massive waste within the federal budget. I heard Senator Blackburn say a while back that only like 12% of federal buildings were occupied. Meanwhile, they're still paying insurance, they're still paying for utilities, all these things. If I ran Knox County like that, oh my gosh, I'd get thrown out of office on my ear, and I should. If you ran your private business like that, you go bankrupt in no time. So, we have to understand that the federal government is so big that it just becomes very ineffective at a certain point. And any attempts to try to fix that, we should get behind. And yes, it will cause temporary dislocations and temporary pain. But if we don't we have $36.5 trillion national debt. We can no longer just ignore this and say, oh, everything's fine and it's all going to be great. We have to do something about it.
Now let's talk about FEMA. It's been one of the targets for reduction in workforce and funding. Now, of course, we've seen disasters certainly in East Tennessee in the fall, and then Middle and West Tennessee here in just the last few weeks. Are you concerned about access to funds for rebuilding the areas that residents who have experienced disasters or experienced disasters moving forward?
No, I'm not. And one thing we have to remember about FEMA, we've dealt with them ourselves. Sometimes the media will be like, oh my gosh, FEMA is going to give all this money to rebuild. What generally happens is it takes 5 years and you get a quarter to half of what you think you're going to get. Again, there's just a lot of waste and a lot of inefficiency. Long term, I believe that the states should be in charge of disaster recovery if they want to have mutual aid agreements with each other. That's great. But the federal government doing it just is, it just like everything else, most other things the federal government does, it just ends up costing a lot of money and being much less efficient than it otherwise would be. And no one's talking about, the money going away. It's just a different administration, a different way of doing it. But, I'm not worried about that because I think it's already, all those things are already in. So it's not like they're going to be pulled out. And unfortunately, we have seen instances where FEMA was used for political purposes as well. Ultimately, I would like to see that power return. Yeah, it is. But I'd like to see that power come back to the states.
Before we leave tariffs and DOGE, is there anything that would directly affect the county budget in terms of the tariffs, in terms of supplies, sourcing for equipment, materials, that kind of thing?
Yeah. You do worry about global supply chains when things like this happen. That is true not only for us, but everybody. When people think about county government, they think it's all political, but we're also running a business, and we're subject to market forces like supply chain disruptions, inflation, and all the other stuff, just like everyone else is. So we'll just have to see what happens going forward. But yes, there could possibly be some increased prices, and hopefully not supply chain disruptions, but that's a possibility.
Well, and we saw with the supply chain disruption coming out of the pandemic what that did to inflation. At least that was one of the big components of that. We're visiting with Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. When we come back, I want to talk about education particularly, and also talk about what's going on with downtown and with Smokies, the Knoxville Smokies, and all those things. So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Thanks for tuning in. This is More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. We're with you every Saturday from 9 to 10 a.m. and again from 3 to 4 p.m. You can also catch our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcast. You can go to my website, broganfinancial.com, and click on radio and also stream all of our shows. We'll have today's show with Mayor Jacobs. We'll have it up online Tuesday afternoon. Mayor Jacobs, let's talk about education. The school system, I believe, is the biggest expenditure in the county budget. And Tennessee lawmakers and Governor Lee, of course, have pushed through school voucher program for the state. What's your stance on our public schools and the use of funds for school vouchers?
Yeah, so this year in our budget as it currently stands, our schools will get about $700 million out of the county budget. Now, that includes pass-through dollars from both the state and the federal government, but it's about 64% of our total funding, so it's a big number. I'm in favor of school choice, and the reason for that is that I've seen in my own life it just offers folks who need something a little different than the conventional education. It offers them a different path. For instance, my brother is an auto mechanic. He wasn't very good at sitting in the classroom, reading from a book. He was very good working with his hands. Fortunately, where I grew up in Missouri, we had a tri-county VOTEC center. Now, it was public school still, but nevertheless, if he hadn't had that, I don't know what his life would have turned out like. So we just need to offer young people as many different options as possible, and it's the taxpayers' money in the end. It's not my money. It's not the school's money, right? And the more that we can allow people to determine how to utilize that, the better. And I think one of the things that was really overlooked is the Education Freedom Act probably did more for public schools than it actually did for, say, school choice, in that for the first time ever it put a funding floor under schools. So you see a lot of, I don't worry about it in Knox County. We're not going to see a huge exodus from our schools because our schools do a very good job. And there are those different alternatives. We literally have school choice within our public school system, especially with the 865 academies and many of the innovative things that Superintendent Ryswick has been doing. But for the smaller counties that worry about losing students, it doesn't matter because they have a floor now for the first time ever. So I actually said, that if you are for public education, you should support this bill because it actually ensures this funding at a certain level which schools have never had before.
Yeah, and I know that was one of the things that was getting in the way of, Jason Zachary's support, and certainly, a couple of our Congress people from this area, was to make sure that there would be some funding. They just want to make sure that they had that funding floor, I believe.
Right.
Now, you said,
Jim, if I could follow, I'm sorry. I always say this isn't going to make a difference for huge amounts of people, but for the people that it does, it will be a huge difference. There's only 20,000 of these scholarships, and there's over 1 million school-age kids in the state of Tennessee. That'll go up as we see hopefully more uptake. But if it doesn't, okay, it remains at that level of scholarships. But it's not a huge number of students, and I don't think you're going to see a mass exodus from many schools. And frankly, if you do, the schools need to be pretty introspective and think, why are these kids leaving? And again, I don't think that's going to impact Knox County schools because we do a very good job.
Now, you have said that the state should invest in technical education to produce more engineers and computer scientists. Can you just kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, in one of the earlier segments, we talked about nuclear energy and how important that is. And really, I think that's a transformational opportunity for East Tennessee. We can only take advantage of that if we have the workforce to accommodate those jobs. And that means nuclear engineers, that means computer scientists. And we need that across the country as well. Manufacturing obviously is still a huge component of the global economy, but innovation has become bigger and bigger, and it's actually the driving force now behind the global economy. So if we want to be able to compete, we have to be able to produce the talent that can do it, right? So I'm really glad that University of Tennessee has been moving in that direction. They have talked about the Oak Ridge Institute to supply more nuclear engineers to Oak Ridge. We just had, Bechtel, which is the big, the big nuclear engineering firm. They now have a headquarters in Knoxville. So if you think about it, they're in like Houston, London, Abu Dhabi, Knoxville, right? How does that happen? But the reason is because we have an opportunity here in nuclear to become a leader worldwide. And if we can take advantage of that, it's really transformational for our region. So I think that's something that's really important. And, folks have been moving in that direction, and I commend them for doing that.
Yeah, I think the innovation, and you absolutely agree with that because, when we have paradigm shifts in our economy, I'm not of the belief that it's going to just eliminate tons and tons of jobs. I mean, it'll reduce some jobs, but the work skills of our workforce are simply going to have to evolve and change.
Right.
And so, investing.
What happens is, actually, so it creates more jobs just in other areas. And yes, you have to retrain and retool. But you look at the internet revolution, and that was going to put all these people out of business. And it did. Joseph Schumpeter, who is a very famous economist, talked about creative destruction. So you do lose jobs in certain industries, but what you see is actually more jobs and better jobs throughout the entire economy. The internet revolution produced more millionaires than anything in history. And now we have so many people that work in that economy. So again, short term, it's very uncomfortable, especially for those people that are impacted. Long term, though, and it's also it's nature. And we have to adapt to that.
Absolutely. The Board of Education just approved the contract for a new elementary school in Farragut. Tell us about the new school and future plans for the school system.
Yeah, so the schools have been doing a very good job of being forward-looking and trying to figure out how to cut costs with infrastructure. Obviously, the Farragut area has grown a lot, so there's a need for that. We're also looking at I know they're looking at rural high school and what to do with that. That's currently a county property, but it will go over to schools at some point as they determine how they want to move forward. Again, I have a lot of respect for Dr. Ryswick and his folks, and we work very closely together. We're very like-minded on many things, and they understand things like budgetary constraints. At the same time, they have a job to do. So threading that needle can be difficult at times, but we all work together to make sure it happens.
Well, I'd like to ask you about the federal debt. You mentioned that in one of our earlier segments, the $36 trillion. It's just kind of a mind-numbing type of a number. And we really should look at it as how much do we owe compared to the size of the economy, right. Debt to GDP. And it's as high as it's ever been, including at the end of World War II. Mm-hmm. So what is your view on the importance of getting that under control? Different economists have different views of the role of federal debt in a country's growth. What do you say? And how might that start to affect us here in East Tennessee if with all the challenges?
So it's the same at the county, okay? Our debt in absolute dollars has gone up, but when you look at it compared to our budget, compared to our revenue, compared to per capita, it's actually remained flat over the past 10 years. What we really are concerned with is cash flow. We're always going to be taking on more debt as people move in. We have to build new schools, have to build new roads. We have to, repair things. Now, like some places are I think they're crazy because, they'll put their paving budget in their capital budget, which is insane because capital is one-time expenses. Our paving budget is operational. So we don't want to bond paving because it's just an ongoing expense. And that's how you have to look at those things. It's different from a household because generally you're going to buy one house and sell it and buy another house and sell it. and keep on rolling that over or stay in it for the rest of your life, right? Government's a little different because we're just always in that process, but you still have to look at capital versus operational. The issue is when you start taking out debt and bonding for operational expenses, you're in a lot of trouble. And currently, the federal government is going to spend about $1 trillion on interest on the debt this year. The interest is an operational expense. That's something we don't bond our debt payments. We pay for them out of our operational budget. That's where the real issue comes in, and I think some of the things I've heard that like President Trump is trying to do, even with the tariffs, is drive down the bond rates so that you can refinance at a lower level, so you can bring those interest payments down. But that's just a short-term fix. The issue is once that debt becomes so high that you can no longer service it, how do you do that? When you raise taxes, which dampens the economy, there's just not really many good options. Again, something has to be done. DOGE is doing a great job, but those cuts have to be codified because if they don't go in the budget, they can come right back. So many of the things that are happening, they're good things, but Congress has to follow through, and they have to pass a budget which does cut spending. And if we don't do that, we're just going to be in a lot of trouble going forward.
Yeah, you look at Japan's economy, they've had higher debt levels than us for the last 30 years, and they've very, very slow economic growth over that period of time, and it's because of the interest on the debt. Interestingly enough, I think when Trump announced the pause on his reciprocal tariffs, for my view, the number one thing that drove that was the 10-year Treasury bond shot up in terms of the interest rate. And we have a lot of debt that's coming due in the next 120 days that will have to be refinanced at these rates, and it creates real challenges for the budget.
I 100% agree with you. The bond market, folks look at government and they often think government can do anything it wants. No, the markets actually determine a lot of things, and the markets are much bigger and much more powerful, much more influential than government. And I agree with you. I think what was one of the things that drove that decision was the bond market and what was happening there.
Absolutely. We're visiting with Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. When we come back, I know sports and politics sports to politics has been a big part of your journey. I want to talk about some of the things that are happening on the landscape right now. I want to talk about Knoxville Smokies. I also want to get your view. Tennessee's been all in the news in the last week and a half because of NIL and Nico Iamaleava, and I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on in the NIL and college athletics space. So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
This is More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Thanks for tuning in this week as we've been visiting with Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. And I do want to talk a little bit about sports in this last segment. First off, the Smokies had opening day this week in the new stadium. I have heard nothing but wonderful things about that entire venue. How was the first event?
It was amazing. The stadium exceeded my wildest expectations. The thing that I really found most rewarding. This was a multi-year effort, many people involved. It was a true public-private partnership. I think that other places will look at what we did and replicate that model. So, it's a win for everybody in that respect. But then you see people working at the stadium, all the things that will come up in the private sector around the stadium. It's an anchor for development and revitalization of East Knoxville. So it's the things that we don't see right now that are actually the most exciting to me. The venue itself is just amazing. It's the nicest minor league stadium in the country and will be until someone builds something nicer and new, but it's beautiful. There are no bad views. And there's also a sense of community there. It kind of reminded me of like Wrigley Field, where you have these common areas where people are just hanging out, watching the game. And so overall, it was just that first night was, and the Smokies won as well. So it was an amazing night.
Well, and interestingly enough, we're becoming a baseball town. I mean, we're packing out on the same night. We're packing out Lindsey Nelson Stadium for UT baseball and packing out the new stadium for Smokies baseball. So definitely becoming more of a baseball town. Of course, Tony Vitello's had a lot to do with that, of course. And then, of course, the efforts to bring the Smokies back. I mentioned about NIL, name, image, and likeness, and I know that's getting a little bit out of your wheelhouse, but there's a lot of challenges. Of course, Tennessee's been so in the news the last week and a half with Nico Iamaleava moving on. Congress has tried to get in, tried to start addressing some of this. I don't know that we need the government to be stepping in and trying to regulate college athletics. What do you say?
I wouldn't. I 100% agree, because if you want to see it get really messed up, let Congress control it. But there are some issues. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad that the kids are getting paid now. It seemed unfair to me that everyone is making a lot of money, and the kids will get. Obviously, you get a college education, but still, if you got hurt or whatever, that was the end of the line for you. And they just, it just seems somewhat unfair. But how it's being done now, I don't know that it's a great thing. I was actually talking with a football coach at a mid-major school, and he said that one of his offensive linemen, they made a bowl game, and one of his offensive linemen comes up to me, he's like, "Coach, I need more money to play in this game." And the coach is like, "Son, that's not how this works. You basically have a contract or an agreement, and you can't just change that in the middle of it." So you're dealing with, young people, and sometimes their advisors, who don't understand those things. This coach told me he'd rather actually at this point be in the NFL, because he feels more like a general manager than he does a coach. So it's definitely changed things. I will say that UT sports is vitally important for our economy. When they do well, we just end up doing much better. When they don't do well, we don't. So even though that is out of my wheelhouse, yes, that is something that we pay attention to.
Well, and what a great time to be a Tennessee Vol. I mean, we're good at, people call us the everything school. I mean, we're just good at everything. But the presidents and the athletic directors have to get their arms around it. I don't think the system we have now is very sustainable, but again, that's a little bit out of your wheelhouse. I do want to, your journey's been interesting. You tried baseball, then you went basketball, ended up in football, and then, of course, professional wrestling. You'd recently challenged Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to a charity wrestling match after some comments he made on a podcast. Any chance we're going to see this?
I don't think so. He hasn't contacted me about it yet. There's an open invitation. It would be fun, and it would raise a lot of money, seriously. So
it would.
And then, obviously, I did that to bring attention to his comments, but at the same time, in the end, we could have, I think we'd walk away as friends, and we'd raise money for good cause. I don't see, I think it'd be win-win for everybody.
Mayor Jacobs, we just have about 40 seconds left here, but as your second term winds down, I know you're getting questions about what's next for Glenn Jacobs. What are your future aspirations? I know you're focused on the last 15, 18 months, but what's next for Mayor Jacobs?
Yeah, and that is my focus, is just finishing out as strongly as I can, mainly wrapping up things that we already have in the works and hopefully setting the next mayor up to be successful. As for me personally, I don't know. I'm one of those, you mentioned how I'd done different things and finally found something I was good at and pursued that. And that's just kind of how my life has been. When opportunities come up, I've been fortunate enough to take advantage of those. But I'm not exactly sure what that might be going forward, if it even is in politics going forward. So we'll see.
Well, Mayor Jacobs, thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule. It's always great to have you on to talk about the wonderful things going on here in Knox County.
Thanks, Jim. You take care.
Absolutely.
Happy Easter to everybody as well, please.
Happy Easter. It is a holy weekend. We celebrate a risen Christ. Hope everybody has a tremendous weekend. That's Mayor Glenn Jacobs. We've been talking about community, because a greater community provides for more living, so you can live the best years of your life your way. Many thanks to Wayne for engineering the show and to Jill for helping produce the show. Have a very blessed holiday weekend. This is More Living with Jim Brogan, right here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
The views expressed by Jim Brogan and his guests are not that of Cumulus Media. Any discussion of financial, legal, and tax planning strategies is not intended to be individualized advice and is general in nature. Always consult with your advisor for advice specific to your needs. This program's content does not represent a recommendation of any particular security, strategy, or investment by Jim Brogan or Brogan Financial Incorporated.